I had always known my daughter Tiffany was strong-willed, but this was something else. The moment she walked into the room, her eyes sharp and demanding, I could feel it. Something was off. "Clark," she started, voice tight, her gaze flickering between me and Harry, her husband, who stood just behind her with that smug smile of his. "We need to talk." I didn't say anything at first. Tiffany's tone was enough to let me know this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. "Sit down," she added. She pointed to the chair across from her, as if I had no choice. As I sat, I caught Harry's eyes. He didn't look worried. In fact, he looked pleased, like he knew exactly what was coming. Tiffany took a deep breath. "I think you know what this is about." I did. But I didn't say a word. Let her speak. Let her lay it out. "We've been talking," she continued, "and we think it's time for you to choose. Either you serve Harry," she gestured toward him, "or you leave. It's that simple." Her words hit harder than anything I could have expected. Serve Harry? I glanced over at Harry, who nodded slightly as if he had all the power in the world. Tiffany's eyes were sharp, waiting for me to respond, but the truth of her demand lingered in the air. I let it sit there for a moment. My chest tightened. Anger, hurt, disbelief. They all surged inside me, but I didn't let it show. Not a flicker, not a muscle moved. "Is that what you really want?" I asked calmly. My voice was steady, controlled, but it came out as cold as I felt inside. Tiffany's jaw clenched. "It's not about what I want, Dad. It's about what needs to happen for the house to run smoothly. Harry works hard, and we can't have you making everything harder for him." I glanced at Harry, who was standing there with his arms crossed, looking like he was too good for this. He wasn't the man I had hoped Tiffany would marry, not by a long shot, but I couldn't show any of that. I couldn't let her see the anger, the resentment. "I see," I said. "You want me to be Harry's servant or leave, just like that." Tiffany nodded, but her face betrayed nothing. She was cold, the same way she had been when she was a teenager, when I did everything for her, and it still wasn't enough. I stood up. Tiffany's eyes flickered with surprise. Harry didn't move. He just watched me. There was nothing to say. Nothing more to discuss. I turned to Tiffany. "Fine," I said, my voice quiet but final. "I'll leave." The shock was evident on their faces. I wasn't falling apart, wasn't yelling, wasn't begging. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. Tiffany's mouth opened, but no words came out. Harry just blinked, looking at me like I was something he couldn't quite figure out. I walked out of the room, quietly, calmly. I didn't slam the door behind me. I didn't shout. I just left. A week passed before the reality of it all hit. I was staying in a small motel on the edge of town. Nothing fancy. I didn't need anything fancy. But it was mine. It was quiet. And for the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of freedom. I spent most of my time thinking about everything I'd given up for Tiffany, all the years I'd sacrificed for her and Harry, all the things I'd done for them, and how it was never enough. They had taken, and taken. And now they wanted me gone. But I was done. I wasn't going to let them continue using me, not anymore. I had money saved, enough to live comfortably, enough to make sure I wouldn't need anyone. Not Tiffany, not Harry, no one. But they'd regret it. They'd regret pushing me out like I didn't matter. I pulled my phone from my bag, opened my banking app, and made a few calls. There were things I needed to take care of, things that would make sure Tiffany and Harry felt the consequences of their actions. I wasn't going to just walk away quietly. They would learn, the hard way. It wasn't about revenge, not at first. It was about getting my life back. But if they wanted to play this game, they'd see just how far I was willing to go. And when the time came, they'd realize the price they'd paid for their arrogance. This was only the beginning, and they wouldn't see me coming. It felt strange to be back at the house after everything that had happened. I had walked away a week ago, the sting of Tiffany's words still fresh in my mind. But now I had to return. They were my groceries after all, and no one else was going to get them. Not that I was doing it for them, but it was a mundane task, one that didn't need any further thought. I grabbed the bags from the back of my truck and walked up the front steps. The familiar smell of home hit me the moment I entered, mixed with a slight mustiness from the unused corners. I hadn't expected much of a greeting, but when I opened the door, there he was. Harry, sitting in my recliner like it was his, flipping through the channels without a care in the world. He didn't even look up as I walked in. "Got the beer, old man?" he asked casually, his voice dripping with that familiar smugness. It hit me like a slap. He'd never seen me as anything more than someone to serve him, and I had put up with it for too long. My jaw tightened, but I didn't respond right away. I wanted him to realize who was still in control here. Instead, I placed the groceries on the counter, keeping my back to him for a moment. I could feel him watching me, waiting for me to fall in line. Tiffany walked in just as I turned around, her gaze immediately moving to the groceries. She seemed pleased, like this was all part of the plan. "Thanks, Dad," she said, but her tone was almost too sweet. I didn't miss the underlying edge. I didn't say anything right away. I just stared at her, the silent tension thick between us. I wasn't going to play along anymore, not today. "Clark," she started, as though she was speaking to a child, "Harry's asked you to grab him a beer. Don't be so difficult." I felt my patience begin to snap, but I kept it in check. "I'm not your servant, Tiffany," I said evenly, meeting her eyes. "And I'm certainly not Harry's." Harry's casual demeanor faltered for a second. Then he pushed himself up from the recliner, a scowl twisting his face. "You're making a big mistake, old man," he sneered. "You think you can just waltz in here and act like you're in charge? This is our house now. You're nothing here." It was the same thing he always said, but today something inside me clicked. The man had no power over me, not anymore. "I don't need to be here," I said, the words coming out crisp without hesitation. "It's still my house, Harry. You're just a guest here." Tiffany's eyes widened. She hadn't expected me to stand my ground. Neither had Harry. He took a step closer, but I didn't flinch. "You don't want to be here, huh?" Harry's voice lowered, trying to intimidate. "Well, maybe I should make sure you know who's really in charge." I raised an eyebrow. "You want to threaten me? In my own house?" I crossed my arms, watching him carefully. "Go ahead. But just remember, it's still my house, and I don't have to be here." The surprise on both of their faces was almost satisfying. Tiffany's expression faltered, her mouth opening like she had more to say but couldn't find the words. Harry, on the other hand, just stood there for a moment, his fists clenching, before his bravado returned. "You're seriously leaving then?" Tiffany finally asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Yes," I said calmly. "I'm packing my things, and I'm leaving. But before I go, I'll remind you one last time. I'm not your servant, Tiffany. And I'm certainly not Harry's." I turned to leave, but Tiffany stepped forward, blocking my way. Her eyes were wide with disbelief. "Dad, you don't mean it. Please." I shook my head, the decision final. "I mean it. I'm done." And with that, I walked out. There was no more to say. They could stay in their house, with their rules. But not me. I was done. Tiffany and Harry might have expected a breakdown, a scene, maybe even a desperate plea for me to stay. But they didn't get that from me. They got a quiet, controlled exit, a calm rejection of the life they had wanted me to live under their thumb. As I left the house, I knew the next step was clear. They had to feel the consequences of their actions. I would make sure of it. It wasn't over yet. It felt like a strange freedom, the hum of the cheap motel air conditioner filling the silence as I unpacked my things. The walls were thin, the carpet worn, but it didn't matter. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, wasn't waiting for the next demand from Tiffany or Harry. It was just me and the quiet. I could breathe. I hadn't realized how much I had given up for them. I had always been the provider, the one who stepped in when something went wrong, the mortgage payments, the insurance, the endless bills. Tiffany never asked for help. She just expected it, as if it was my duty, my role in this family. And for years, I had let it happen. But now I was done. I didn't need them. I didn't need to keep giving. I didn't need to be their safety net anymore. I sat on the edge of the bed, taking out my phone. I had the skills to do this, and I knew exactly what needed to be done. Tiffany and Harry didn't even know it yet, but they were about to feel the weight of everything I had been carrying for them. The first thing on my list, cancel all the automatic payments. I opened my banking app, scrolling through the list of transactions I had been making for months, even years. Payments for their mortgage, their utilities, the credit cards that had been racking up interest under their names. It was all gone now. One by one, I canceled the automatic payments. The mortgage, gone. The insurance, gone. The credit cards, gone. The house was still under my name, and I had been the one keeping it all afloat. But not anymore. A sense of liberation washed over me as the confirmation emails began to pour in. They'd never expect this. Tiffany and Harry had been so used to me handling everything that they wouldn't know how to react when it all came crashing down. The silence in the room was heavy, but it felt right. I felt light, as if I had finally let go of something that had been weighing me down for far too long. I could almost imagine their faces when the bills started piling up and the payments didn't go through. The frustration, the panic, it would be all on them now. I leaned back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling. There was no immediate fallout, and that's what made it so much sweeter. No desperate calls from Tiffany yet. No frantic messages from Harry. They were still in the dark, still unaware of the storm I had set in motion. But I knew it wouldn't last. The consequences would hit them soon enough, and when they did, I would be ready. I had spent my whole life sacrificing for them. Now, they would learn what it felt like to face the reality of their own choices. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I used to be. This wasn't about rage. It was about reclaiming my life, about showing Tiffany and Harry that there were consequences for taking someone's kindness for granted. The next few days were quiet. I had enough savings to ride this out for a while. I could take the time I needed, plan the next steps, maybe even think about what I really wanted from the rest of my life. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about cutting off financial support. No, this was about more than money. It was about power, control, and it was about time I took it back. I could already hear Tiffany and Harry's voices in my head, their desperate attempts to reach out to me, begging me to help. But I wouldn't answer. Not yet. They had to learn. This was their lesson, and I wasn't going to make it easy for them. I closed my eyes, letting the silence fill the space. It was finally mine. The motel room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. I had spent the past few days reflecting on everything, watching the hours stretch out in front of me as I waited for something to happen. I knew Tiffany and Harry would eventually realize what I'd done, but part of me didn't expect the fallout to come so soon. It started with the first voicemail. I picked up my phone, the familiar number flashing on the screen. Tiffany. I had been expecting this. She didn't waste any time. I pressed play, listening to the shaky tone of her voice. Dad, this is ridiculous. I don't know what's going on, but the mortgage payment didn't go through. The insurance payment is overdue. We need your help. Please, call me. I wasn't surprised. I'd been their safety net for so long that it must have felt like the rug was pulled out from under them. But for me, the feeling was one of relief. They would now feel the weight of their dependence on me. I didn't respond. Not yet. The next day, the calls began to escalate. First, Harry, then Tiffany, then both of them in a panic. Harry's message was filled with frustration. Clark, what the hell is going on? I went to pay the bills, and they've all been rejected. You think this is funny? You've really screwed us over. Call me. I rolled my eyes at his arrogance. He didn't even consider that this was coming back to bite him. For years, he had taken what I gave him, never once questioning whether he deserved it. Now, he was learning what it felt like to be without. Tiffany's message was next, but this one was different. She was trying to appeal to me emotionally, her voice quivering. Dad, please. I didn't think you'd just stop. We're struggling here. I don't know what happened, but we need you. Harry's freaking out. Please help us. I let the voicemail play out without responding, leaning back on the bed. I had been the one making all the sacrifices for so long, and for the first time, I wasn't the one in crisis. For the first time, the burden wasn't mine to carry. The realization was bittersweet. As the day wore on, the calls didn't stop. My phone lit up again and again, voicemails filling up with pleas, accusations, and desperate cries for help. I was their lifeline, and now, without me, they were sinking. I had always been the one to make the sacrifices. I had always been the one to step in, to fix things. But no more. I had spent years being their financial savior, bending over backward to make sure they had what they needed. But they never appreciated it. Now, it was their turn to face the consequences. By the time evening rolled around, I was at peace with my decision. I knew the fallout was coming. The desperation would grow, but I wouldn't be the one to save them this time. This time, they would have to stand on their own. I leaned forward and checked my messages. Tiffany had sent a text, her tone more urgent now. Dad, please, we need to talk. We don't know how to fix this without you. But I didn't respond. I wasn't going to answer their calls. I wasn't going to be manipulated by their panic. Instead, I turned off my phone for the night. I knew the drama would unfold, but it wasn't my responsibility anymore. It was their mess, not mine, and I wasn't going to clean it up. The quiet of the motel room wrapped around me like a blanket. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't just a provider anymore. I wasn't just the person they turned to when they needed something. I was free. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over yet. The real consequences were still to come. The knock on the door was sharp, insistent, and uninvited. I was expecting it, but it still struck a chord. Tiffany and Harry had tracked me down. I had been alone in my small motel room for a few days now, relishing the solitude. No more frantic calls, no more constant expectations, just quiet. But I knew they wouldn't let me stay out of their lives for long. They needed something, just like always. I walked to the door, taking a deep breath before I opened it. There they were, standing on the other side. Tiffany, looking as though she had just walked out of a high-end boutique, and Harry, his usual smug look, replaced by an almost desperate intensity. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "We need to talk," Tiffany said, her eyes darting between me and the room behind me. She looked nervous. Harry, on the other hand, seemed more angry than anything else. The last time I saw him, he was lounging in my recliner, ordering me around like a servant. "Talk about what?" I asked, my eyes narrowing slightly. Harry stepped forward, ignoring the polite space I was trying to maintain. "You've left us hanging. The mortgage payment is due, Clark, and you know damn well you were covering that for us. What's going on?" I didn't flinch. "The mortgage? I don't cover that anymore, Harry. You two have made it clear that you're better off without me." Tiffany's eyes widened, and her voice trembled slightly as she stepped in front of Harry. "Dad, please. This isn't the way to handle it. You just cut us off without warning. We didn't know it would be this bad." She tried to reach for my arm, a gesture meant to coax some sympathy from me, but I pulled back, meeting her gaze with steady resolve. "You knew exactly what would happen, Tiffany. You've always known, and I've been the one to carry the weight. Not anymore." Harry took a step forward, his eyes hardening. "You think you can just walk away from us like this, after everything we've done for you?" I shook my head, not even bothered by his posturing. "What have you done for me, Harry? You've used me. You've let Tiffany believe I'm some kind of fool, always there to pick up the pieces. Not anymore. You're on your own." Tiffany's face crumpled, and for a moment, I almost saw the daughter I used to know, the one who trusted me, who came to me for advice. But that was long gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. "We're not asking for a handout, Dad," she said softly, her voice cracking. "We're just asking for some time to figure things out. Please, just help us." I stood there for a moment, letting her words sink in. But my resolve didn't waver. This wasn't about time. This was about them facing the consequences of their choices, and it wasn't my responsibility to fix it. "You don't get it, do you?" I said, my voice calm but firm. "This isn't about giving you more time. This is about you two learning how to handle things on your own. You're guests in my house, Tiffany. You've never really earned the right to stay here. I've carried the load long enough." I could see the hurt in her eyes, but there was something else there too. Resentment. Resentment that I was no longer playing the role they expected of me. Harry stood there, fists clenched, but not saying a word. He knew better than to threaten me now. "I'm leaving," I said, turning my back to them and walking toward my bag. I began to pack my things, every movement deliberate. Tiffany's voice broke. "Dad, please, we need you." But I couldn't be swayed anymore, not by her tears, not by Harry's threats. This had gone on for too long, and this time I wasn't going to fix their mess. I closed the suitcase with a final snap and turned to face them one last time. "I'm done," I said, voice low and steady. "You two can figure this out on your own. I'm not your financial security blanket anymore." Tiffany stood frozen, unable to respond. Harry just glared at me, his anger evident, but his power slipping away. I walked past them, heading for the door. Before I left, I turned back one last time. "Good luck, Tiffany. You'll need it." Then I stepped out of the room, leaving them behind. They'd never see me in the same way again. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty. The weight of the situation had finally hit me. I had walked away from Tiffany and Harry, left the house that had been mine for so long, and severed all financial ties. But this wasn't just about getting some peace. No, there was more to it than that. The last few days had shown me that I was dealing with more than just a spoiled daughter and a manipulative son-in-law. There was something darker lurking beneath their behavior, something far more dangerous. I had spent years taking care of them, years of paying bills, covering debts, and trying to be the father and father-in-law they never really appreciated. But that wasn't enough. Tiffany and Harry had taken advantage of me in ways I hadn't fully understood until now. That's why I had decided to dig deeper. I needed to know exactly what kind of people they were. I made my way to Bob Harrison's office, an old acquaintance of mine who'd worked as a real estate agent for years. I had known him since my younger days in town, and we'd always gotten along. It was time to call in a favor. When I walked into his office, he looked up from his desk, his face lighting up when he saw me, but his expression shifted the moment I mentioned why I was there. "Clark, you want to know about Harry, don't you?" Bob said, his voice low. I nodded, my stomach tightening. "What's going on, Bob?" He leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been hearing things, Clark. A few weeks ago, Harry tried to apply for a home equity loan using your property as collateral. Now, that's something I didn't expect. But it gets worse." My mind raced. "What are you talking about?" Bob took a breath, his eyes flickering around the room, as though to make sure no one was listening. "Harry's been in trouble for a while. He's got gambling debts, Clark, serious ones. And he tried to use your house to cover them. He wanted to take out a loan that you'd never know about, until it was too late." I felt my blood run cold. All this time, I had assumed Harry was just taking advantage of me for money and comfort. But this was something else entirely. He was willing to risk everything to cover up his debts, even my home. I didn't speak for a moment, letting the information sink in. "He tried to steal from me," I muttered. "Yes," Bob confirmed. "And I'd bet my last dollar that he would have gone through with it if the loan had been approved. He knew how to cover his tracks." I stood up, my mind racing with the implications. But Bob wasn't finished. "That's not all, though. I also heard that Harry's been gambling more than usual lately. His bookie's been looking for him. It's a mess, Clark. You're better off without them." I nodded, my hands clenched into fists. I had suspected something was off, but now I had proof. Harry wasn't just a lazy, entitled man. He was a liar, a gambler, and a manipulator. And I was done being part of his game. I left Bob's office with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in a while. The plan was coming together. Now that I knew what kind of man Harry truly was, I could start making the moves that would protect what was still mine, and give Tiffany and Harry the wake-up call they deserved. Later that afternoon, I met with Detective Jim Morrison, an old friend who had worked in law enforcement for years. He was more than willing to help me uncover the full extent of Harry's actions. After a brief conversation, Morrison confirmed that Harry's gambling problems were far worse than I had realized, and that his debts had been spiraling out of control for months. "Clark," Morrison said, his voice grim, "you're not just dealing with someone who's irresponsible with money. You're dealing with a man who's trying to play everyone around him to cover his tracks. He's dangerous. And he's only going to get worse." That was all the confirmation I needed. I wasn't just dealing with a spoiled son-in-law anymore. I was dealing with someone who had no qualms about using others to get what he wanted, even if it meant destroying lives in the process. I stood up, ready to take the next steps. "Thanks, Jim. I've got everything I need." As I walked out of the police station, my mind was already working on what I would do next. Harry and Tiffany would have to learn the hard way. They would regret everything they had done. And I would make sure they never had the chance to take advantage of me or anyone else again. I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The courthouse smelled like old paper and stale coffee. The air was thick with bureaucracy, but to me, it felt like a breath of fresh air. I had spent too many years carrying the weight of Tiffany and Harry's irresponsibility. It was time to take control, time to make things right. And today, I was taking the first legal steps to rid myself of their mess once and for all. I sat in the waiting area, flipping through the papers in my hands. The eviction notice I was about to file was just the beginning. The thought of Harry and Tiffany's surprise when the notice arrived made me feel a strange sense of satisfaction. It had been months, years even, of living under their thumb, doing their bidding without so much as a thank you. But that was over. This time, I was the one making the calls. When my name was called, I stood up, my back straight, and walked to the counter. The clerk behind the desk looked up, clearly used to the endless stream of paperwork that came through these doors. She asked for my paperwork, which I handed over, my mind already racing ahead. "You want to file for eviction?" she asked, her tone neutral. "Yes," I replied, "and I also need to file a restraining order against Harry." Her eyebrow raised, but she didn't ask questions. She processed the paperwork quickly and efficiently. I could feel a knot in my stomach, but I pushed it down. It was time to put an end to this. I was no longer going to let Tiffany and Harry control my life, my house, my future. As I handed the papers back to me, the clerk said, "You'll need to wait a few days for the court to process this. The restraining order may take longer." I nodded, my eyes scanning the papers in front of me. Everything was in motion now. They wouldn't be able to stay in my house much longer. And once the restraining order was in place, Harry wouldn't be able to come near me or my property again. I went back to the motel later that day, feeling a small sense of victory. It wasn't over yet, but I had started the process. I couldn't help but wonder what Tiffany and Harry would do when they realized their time in the house was running out. Would they beg me to take them back? Or would they dig in their heels, trying to maintain control? I didn't know, and honestly, I didn't care. What mattered was that I was finally doing something for myself. They had spent years taking advantage of me, thinking I'd always be there to catch them when they fell. But no more. This was the beginning of my new life, and it felt damn good. The phone rang as I sat down on the bed, looking at the small stack of paperwork in my lap. I picked it up, knowing exactly who it was. Tiffany. She had already started trying to reach me again. "Dad, we need to talk," she said when I answered. "The bills aren't getting paid. What's going on? We can't fix this without you. Please come back." I leaned back against the headboard, allowing myself a quiet sigh before speaking. "You need to take responsibility for your own mistakes, Tiffany. I'm not your safety net anymore." "I know you're upset, but this is serious," she pressed. "Harry's been freaking out. We don't know what we're going to do without you." "I've made my decision, Tiffany," I said, my voice firm, but not unkind. "You two have made your choices, and now you'll have to face the consequences. I'm not going to help you fix everything anymore. You're on your own." There was a long silence on the other end. Then I heard a sniffle, followed by Tiffany's voice, quieter now. "Dad, please, don't do this." "I already have," I replied softly, "and I'm done being the one who fixes everything. This isn't about being cruel. It's about you learning how to stand on your own 2 feet." I hung up the phone without another word, feeling a strange calm wash over me. The relief was bittersweet, but there was no turning back. I had done the right thing. Now, it was time for Tiffany and Harry to face the fallout. And when the eviction notice arrived at their door, they would understand that the days of depending on me were over. Word spread quickly, as it often does in small towns. The gossip was already flying through the community, and Harry's attempts to spin his version of events weren't helping. He had tried to paint me as the villain, the cold, distant father who walked away from his family without a second thought. But the lies didn't stick. The truth, on the other hand, was like wildfire. It wasn't long before his gambling debts, his fraudulent loan application, and his history of manipulation came to light. People started talking. They began to see the kind of person Harry really was, and it wasn't the golden son-in-law Tiffany had always believed in. The mask he had worn so carefully for years was slipping, revealing the fraud beneath. I could hear the whispers, the quiet conversations at the diner, the subtle glances people gave me when I walked into a store. The town had never been shy about its opinions, and now they knew the truth. They were starting to side with me, and Harry's lies were falling apart. But the real shock came when Tiffany, seeing the tide turn, called me. I hadn't heard from her since our confrontation at the motel. The last time we spoke, she had been tearfully pleading for me to help them, to fix their mess. But now her voice was different, steady, quieter. "Dad," she began, her voice soft. "Can we talk?" I took a deep breath, leaning back in the chair, my thoughts flickering to the past, to everything that had led us here. "What do you want to talk about, Tiffany?" I've been thinking about everything," she said, her words slow and careful. "I've been thinking about how I've treated you, about everything Harry's done, and I just want to say, I'm sorry. I should have seen it. I should have known better." I could hear the genuine regret in her voice, but I had learned not to be swayed by empty words. This was the same Tiffany who had used me without hesitation, who had sided with Harry even when I had tried to warn her. But something in her apology felt different this time. It wasn't just words. There was a shift. Maybe she was finally starting to see how deep the damage went. "I didn't want to believe what was happening," she continued. "But now, seeing everything fall apart, I realize how much I've enabled him, how much I've taken from you. I stayed quiet, letting her speak, letting her own the words. It was a small step, but it was something. "You were right," she said finally. "I was wrong. I've been wrong about so many things, and I'm sorry. I just want to make things right." I rubbed the back of my neck, my mind swirling. Was this real? Was she just saying what I wanted to hear? Or was it the guilt finally catching up to her? "You can't just fix everything with an apology, Tiffany," I said, my voice low. "Trust has to be earned, not handed back with words." She was quiet for a moment before responding. I know. I don't expect you to just forget everything, but I need you to know I see it now. I see what I've done, and I'm not going to stand by him anymore. I want to do better. I want to rebuild what we had, if you'll let me." I closed my eyes, letting her words hang in the air. The part of me that had always wanted to fix things, to restore some semblance of peace between us, stirred, but I couldn't let that desire cloud my judgment. She was asking for something more than forgiveness. She was asking for change. And that had to come with actions, not promises. "I'm willing to listen," I said finally. "But actions speak louder than words. I won't go back to being the person you can lean on for everything. Not unless you show me you've changed." There was a long silence on the other end. I could practically hear her thinking, weighing the situation, trying to figure out how to navigate this. "I understand," she said quietly. "I'm not asking for you to fix everything. I just need to make things right." The conversation ended there, but it felt like a turning point, like the door to something new had opened. I wasn't sure where it would lead, but for the first time in a long time, I was willing to entertain the idea of rebuilding, on my terms, with honesty and respect at the core. Later that week, the public fallout was in full swing. Harry's lies were unraveling faster than he could keep up. People were talking, my neighbors, old friends, even people I barely knew. Word had spread about his fraudulent activities and his gambling problems. It wasn't long before his once impressive social facade crumbled. His attempts to spread lies about my mental state and abandonment were met with backlash. The community saw through his manipulations. I received an email one evening, a forwarded message from the local news outlet. It was a public statement from Tiffany, an apology for her role in supporting Harry and her ignorance of his true nature. "Clark," it read, "I've spent the last few days reflecting on everything. The truth is, I didn't see it. I didn't see how much I had allowed myself to be controlled, how much I had allowed Harry to manipulate us all. I was blind, but I see it now, and I'm sorry." The email ended with her acknowledging how much damage she had caused and how much damage Harry had done to both of us, but also to the community. The sincerity was there, but I knew it was only a start. This was the first step toward repairing what had been broken. But I wasn't going to make it easy, not for her, and certainly not for Harry. There would be no quick fix. If she wanted to rebuild her relationship with me, she'd have to prove it. But as the news about Harry spread, I felt a strange kind of peace. The truth was out, and Harry, for all his manipulation, was finally facing the consequences of his actions. As for me, I knew this was only the beginning. Sunday morning arrived like any other, but it felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, as though something was about to change, something that couldn't be undone. I had spent the past few weeks sorting through the wreckage that was my relationship with Tiffany and Harry, piecing together what remained of my life. The eviction notice had been filed, the restraining order had been issued, and the fallout from Harry's deceit had spread throughout the town. But today, everything was coming to a head. I had agreed to meet Tiffany at church, something she had asked for a few days ago. She'd said she wanted to talk, and though I didn't know what to expect, I was ready. I wasn't going to be manipulated, but I was open to hearing her out. My only condition was that she had to own her mistakes. No excuses. As I walked into the church, the familiar smell of incense and polished wood filled the air. The congregation was gathered in quiet reverence, but I could feel the weight of eyes on me as I made my way to my seat. Word had already spread about the situation, and I knew that people were watching. They weren't just looking at me as a father and a man wronged. They were seeing the culmination of years of manipulation, deceit, and now, truth. Tiffany was sitting in the front pew, her posture tense as she looked over her shoulder to see me. When our eyes met, there was a flicker of something, regret perhaps, or fear. She motioned for me to join her, and I did, sitting beside her in the pew. The service began, but I could feel the distance between us, even as we sat close. Tiffany's hand shook slightly as she gripped the edge of the pew. I could see that she was struggling with what she needed to say, and part of me wondered if she had finally reached the point where she understood the damage she had done. And then, after what felt like an eternity, she stood. The congregation fell silent as she made her way to the front, stepping up to the pulpit with trembling hands. She looked out at the crowd, her voice quiet but clear when she spoke. "I stand before you today, not just as a daughter, but as someone who has wronged my father," she began. "I've spent so much time trying to defend the choices I made, trying to protect the man I thought was the center of my world. But the truth is, I allowed myself to be blind to what was happening around me. I made excuses for Harry, for myself, and I ignored the sacrifices my father made for us." She paused, her breath shaky, and I could see her eyes brimming with tears. The sincerity was unmistakable. This wasn't just an apology. It was an acknowledgement of everything I had been trying to tell her for so long. "I'm sorry," she said, the words heavy in the quiet church. "I'm sorry for letting you down, for using you, for making you feel like you weren't enough. And I'm sorry for supporting someone who didn't deserve it. I can never undo the damage I've done, but I hope that you can see that I truly understand now. I will never let myself fall into those patterns again. I've learned the hardest lesson of my life, and I hope that, in time, we can rebuild what we lost." The church was still, the air thick with anticipation. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to take her in my arms and tell her it would be okay. But I had learned something important throughout this ordeal. Words alone weren't enough. Tiffany had a lot of work to do if she truly wanted to rebuild our relationship. It couldn't just be about a public apology. It had to be about change, sustained, honest change. When she returned to her seat, I stood, the weight of my decision pressing down on me. I turned to face the congregation, my voice steady as I addressed them all. "Everyone here has witnessed the truth," I said, my eyes scanning the room. "But what I want to make clear is that trust doesn't come back with words alone. It takes time, it takes effort, and it takes honesty. Tiffany's apology is a start, but it's not the end. I won't return to my old role as the provider, the one who picks up the pieces when things fall apart. But I am open to rebuilding something, on new terms, real terms, terms that are based on respect, not obligation." The room was silent as I let those words settle in. Tiffany's face was unreadable, but I could see a glimmer of hope in her eyes. She had made the first step, but there was still a long road ahead. As the service continued, I couldn't help but think about how much had changed. Tiffany had made a public apology, something I never expected, and the weight of that moment wasn't lost on me. She was finally taking responsibility, finally realizing the damage she and Harry had caused. Later that afternoon, Tiffany came to find me. She approached cautiously, her hands wringing in front of her. "Dad, I want you to know that I'm serious about this. I know I can't undo what's been done, but I want to be better. I want to show you that I can change." I looked at her, the woman who had been my daughter, who had betrayed me, and now who seemed genuinely determined to rebuild something. I nodded slowly, my voice calm. "It won't be easy, Tiffany. It won't be quick. But if you're willing to put in the work, then we can start. But on my terms. I'm not here to be a crutch anymore." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes again. "I understand, and I'll do whatever it takes." I didn't hug her then. I didn't forgive her completely. But for the first time, I believed that there was a chance for her to grow, to change, and maybe, just maybe, a chance for us to rebuild what had been broken. Tiffany's divorce from Harry would soon follow. She made the decision to end her marriage, a move that showed she was committed to cutting ties with the man who had manipulated her for so long. It was the right decision, the only decision she could make if she truly wanted to change. For me, the chapter wasn't over, but it was a turning point. The damage wasn't erased in one day, but the path forward was clearer than ever. The next Sunday, I watched as Tiffany made her public apology, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. The healing could begin, but it would be slow, it would be steady, and it would take all of us, working together, honestly and respectfully, to make it work. But this time, I wouldn't be the one to carry all the weight. And that, for me, was the beginning of a new chapter. As I left the church, I could see the group of veterans settling into my old house. I smiled to myself, feeling at peace. The house wasn't just mine anymore. It was theirs, people who truly understood sacrifice. It felt right. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward. And for the first time, I believed that Tiffany and I could rebuild, not out of obligation, but out of honesty and respect. I never imagined this moment would come, not after everything that had happened. But as I stood on the small porch of my cabin by the lake, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. The chaos, the manipulation, the stress, all of it felt like it belonged to someone else now. It wasn't mine anymore. This cabin was my new beginning, a place to escape from the noise, from the past, and to reflect on everything that had led me here. The house I'd lived in for so long, the one I had shared with Tiffany and Harry, was no longer mine, in a way, but I wasn't sad about it. It was theirs now, and I was glad to see it go to people who would appreciate it, like the veterans who had recently moved in, people who understood what sacrifice truly meant. It was late when I heard my phone buzz. I knew who it was before I even checked. Tiffany. I hesitated for a moment before answering. She had reached out a few times in the past few weeks, trying to rebuild what had been broken. I had been cautious, no, firm, about my boundaries. She had a lot to prove, and I wasn't going to make it easy. But there was something different this time, something in her tone that told me this conversation wouldn't be the same as the others. Dad? Tiffany's voice was softer than I expected. She sounded vulnerable, not the woman who had demanded so much of me for so long. I sat on the porch step, feeling the cool evening air brush against my skin. Tiffany, I said, my voice neutral. How are you? I'm okay, she replied quietly. I've been thinking a lot about everything. I took a deep breath, waiting for her to continue. I wasn't going to rush her. I know things have been hard between us, she said, her words coming out slow, as though she were carefully choosing them. And I don't expect you to just forgive me. I know I've hurt you, and I can't change what I did. But I've been trying to figure out how to make it right. I want to rebuild our relationship, if you're willing to let me. Her words hung in the air. I felt the weight of them, the sincerity. She was no longer asking for forgiveness. She was asking for a real chance to change. I don't expect everything to go back to the way it was, she continued, but I'm willing to do the work. I want to be better, not just for you, but for myself. I know it's not enough, but I'm sorry, Dad. Truly. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking in what she had said. The girl who had once ignored my warnings, who had sided with Harry no matter the cost, was finally taking responsibility. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that meant something. I'm glad to hear you say that, I replied after a long pause. But I'm not going to make this easy for you, Tiffany. Words are one thing, but actions, that's what matters now. You've hurt me. You've hurt yourself. But it's up to you to show me that you've changed. I can't go back to being the person who just fixes everything for you. I understand, she said, her voice steady. I'm not asking for you to fix everything. I want to try, slowly, one honest conversation at a time, no more pretending. The sincerity in her voice hit me harder than I expected. She was asking for a fresh start, not from me, but for herself. She wasn't asking me to carry her anymore, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like there might be hope for us. I'm willing to meet you halfway, I said, my voice calm. But it's going to take time. We'll take it one step at a time. But don't expect me to be there for everything like I used to be. That's not going to happen. I understand, Dad, and I won't ask for more than I deserve, she said softly. I could hear the sincerity in her words. She wasn't the same person she had been. She was starting to realize the weight of what had happened, and the work it would take to fix it. I'll meet you for coffee, I said, a small smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. But no promises. It'll take time. Thank you, she whispered. That's all I need, one step at a time. We ended the call there, and I sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of everything wash over me. This wasn't going to be easy, and I knew there would be bumps along the way. But there was a part of me that still believed in the possibility of change, in the possibility of rebuilding. The next few days were quiet. I settled into the rhythm of my new life, one that was no longer defined by my past mistakes, my failed relationships, or the weight of taking care of everyone else. I had finally let go of the responsibility I'd carried for so long. As I sat in the small cabin by the lake, I watched the sun rise over the water, the calm reflection a reminder that peace was something earned, not given. My house was gone, but I was free. I had my own space, my own time, and for the first time in years, I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Tiffany. Can we meet for coffee tomorrow? I smiled, tapping out a reply. Tomorrow works. One step at a time. As I drove into town the next day, I passed by my old home. The veterans were moving in, settling into the space that once belonged to me. I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The house wasn't just mine anymore. It was theirs, people who truly understood sacrifice. I pulled into the coffee shop parking lot, getting out and walking inside. Tiffany was already sitting at a table by the window, her eyes nervously scanning the room. When she saw me, she stood, and for the first time in a long while, I saw the daughter I used to know. We sat across from each other, the silence comfortable, not awkward. And as we talked, step by step, I could see the change in her eyes. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be fast, but it was a start. As I looked at her, I realized something. This wasn't the end of the road. It was the beginning, a new chapter, one where honesty and respect would be at the center. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about what could come next. Clark was finally moving forward, and for the first time in years, he wasn't doing it alone.